Most towns forget their sins. This one buried them in the fog-wrapped hills of Harrow's End, Oregon. There's a silence so thick it feels like it's hiding something. The trees here grow tall, twisted, like they've seen things no bark should bear. But beneath those roots, in soil dark with secrets, lie bones. Hundreds of them. The locals don't talk about the Grayson family, and those who do, don't for long. See, long before Harrow's End had roads or law or even a name, it had a chapel. Small, wooden, crooked from age, like a spine that had seen too many prayers bent over it. It was called Sacred Mercy Church, but nothing merciful ever happened there. In 1851, a man named Grayson rolled into that untouched Oregon wilderness with his wife Constance and younger brother Ezekiel. They didn't bring wagons of goods. They brought shovels, axes, and jars of poison labeled as holy medicine. They claimed they were missionaries come to serve westbound pioneers on the Oregon Trail, and serve they did. They served them death in the name of salvation. At first, no one suspected a thing. Back then, the trail was brutal. People died all the time from cholera, fever, starvation. Families disappeared in the wild without anyone blinking twice. But around Harrow's End, something was different. It wasn't just the number of disappearances, it was who vanished. Entire families, all of them healthy, when last seen, gone. Every one of them had one thing in common. They stopped at the Graysons' chapel. The Graysons knew exactly when to strike. They chose families traveling alone, wagon wheels cracking, children crying, food gone, faith shaken. That's when Father Marai would appear on the horizon, his white collar like a candle in the dark. He spoke softly, called everyone child of God, and offered what every dying traveler wanted: peace, rest, and the comfort of Scripture. But what he really offered was a slow, holy death. Sister Constance played nurse, soft-spoken, graceful, always holding a pouch of healing powder that she mixed into soup, water, or anointed oil. The sick got sicker, the healthy they followed, one by one, and Brother Ezekiel, quiet, watchful, kept inventory of their things. He wasn't just burying bodies, he was cataloging them. The first known victim, a widow from Illinois named Eleanor Vale. Her wagon broke an axle 10 miles from Harrow's End. She had 2 daughters, both under 10. Constance helped her tend to a sick horse. Morai offered Scripture. By the time another traveler passed through weeks later, the wagon was gone, and 3 new graves sat behind the chapel, unmarked to fresh. By 1853, there were whispers. A trader named Jacob Munn said he passed a family of 5 heading toward the Graysons' chapel. A week later, he returned the same way and asked if they'd made it to town. No one had seen them. When he questioned Father Moray, the preacher smiled and said, "The Lord called them home." Jacob never asked again, but in his journal found, decades later, he wrote, "There's something wicked in those hills, and it wears a holy face." By the end of that year, at least 14 families had disappeared near the area, but not a single accusation was ever made. Why? Because the Graysons were untouchable. They gave free medicine. They preached God's word. They buried the dead with psalms and prayer. And most importantly, they blended into a world where suffering was expected. People wanted to believe in them because if you couldn't trust a man of God, who could you trust? What no one knew was that the Graysons weren't just killing, they were perfecting it. They were learning which poisons mimicked which trail sicknesses, which rituals gave comfort, which deaths raised no questions. This wasn't murder, it was method, and it was only just beginning. There was something strange about Father Murray's eyes, not evil exactly, not at first glance, but if you stared long enough, something inside them felt off, to still, like a pond with no fish, like something pretending to be calm. Most who met him said he made them feel peaceful, but peace isn't always safe. Travelers said he listened more than he spoke, that he could read your pain before you even shared it. He knew just when to mention your sick child, your dying mother, your guilt. He called it the gift of discernment, but it wasn't a gift. It was a weapon. Father Murray didn't just kill, he studied. He memorized how suffering softened the mind, how people clung to his words like they were life rafts, how death became acceptable if wrapped in a hymn and a sermon. His sermons were short, soft-spoken, and full of mercy. Mercy for the dead, mercy for the dying, never mercy for the living. It was Constance, though, who made the final decisions. Behind the soft smile and white veil, she held the real power. She was a midwife, a healer, and to most, a saint. Her hands smelled of mint, herbs, and sometimes iron. She kept a notebook, tattered, leather-bound. Inside were recipes, not for bread or tea, but for control, chamomile and belladonna to numb, laudanum and wormwood to slow, arsenic and aconite to end. Everything measured in drops and grams, everything recorded. If a child died too quickly, she adjusted the dosage. If a mother survived longer than expected, she changed the mixture. She called it the restoration ledger, because, as she told one dying man, death is the final restoration of the soul. We only help it arrive more gently. Quiet, blunt, always carrying a rusted spade over his shoulder, was the cleanup man. He never spoke much, just nodded, grunted, and dug. He was the one who dragged bodies from beds to graves, the one who blessed the soil with lye and ash to keep the smell from rising. But he did more than bury the dead. He kept lists, handwritten logs, of every possession taken from every family, coins, tools, furniture, wedding rings, Bibles, each page labeled with dates, names when known, and a number circled at the bottom. That number was the total resale value. They didn't just kill to kill, they killed to build something. By 1855, the chapel had a basement. Locals were told it was for storing medical supplies and winter goods. But inside were racks of clothing, shelves of jewelry, trunks of coins, crates of preserved food, all catalogued, sorted, and stacked. A morgue without cold, and in the center of it all, a table, long, wooden, grooved, with knife marks. Not one traveler who saw that basement ever came out to tell the tale, because the only time strangers went down there was after they drank the tea. It wasn't until a woman named Rebecca Hartley, a widow from Pennsylvania, stopped at the chapel in July 1855 that the Graysons made their first mistake. She didn't drink the tea. She said she didn't trust it, said she had her own remedies. Constance smiled politely, but marked her in the ledger. Ezekiel waited till nightfall, then searched her wagon while she prayed inside the chapel. That's when he found the pistol, loaded, engraved, hidden beneath folded clothes, and he realized something that disturbed him more than anything else they'd ever seen. She came prepared, not for the trail, for them. But by the time he whispered that warning to Marai, it was already too late, because Rebecca wasn't who she said she was. She wasn't just a widow. She was something else entirely, and her arrival at Sacred Mercy would set off a chain of events that threatened to tear the Grayson family's empire apart from the inside. Because some ghosts walk into slaughterhouses with their eyes open, and some don't come to pray, they come to burn. Rebecca Hartley didn't smile much, didn't talk more than she had to, and she never once referred to herself as Mrs. C. She said she'd come from Pennsylvania, but her accent didn't match. She claimed she was heading west to join a cousin's farmstead, but when asked the town's name, she hesitated. Marai noticed, Constance noticed, but neither of them pressed. That was the game. Smile, serve, and kill. Questions came only if answers mattered, and hers, they decided, didn't. They underestimated her. On her second day at the chapel, Rebecca asked to see the graveyard. She said she wanted to pay respects. The Graysons agreed. Of course, they always did. But Rebecca didn't just kneel and pray. She counted 36 markers, all unmarked, all fresh, some barely covered, and while pretending to weep, she picked up a scrap of cloth, half buried in loose soil. A child's scarf, blue, with initials stitched in tiny thread, LF. She pocketed it without flinching. That night, she didn't sleep in the guest quarters. She pretended to, waited for the soft sounds of snoring and distant him humming, and then, in bare feet, she crept out into the cold. She didn't go to the chapel. She went around it, to the back, to the storm doors that led into the basement, the ones she had watched Ezekiel disappear into. Always, at twilight, they weren't locked. What she saw inside didn't shock her. That was the strangest part. The shelves of clothing, the buckets of dried blood, the broken wedding rings stacked in bowls. It was all horrifying. Yes, but it was exactly what she expected. She'd been tracking the Graysons for 11 months. Her real name was Rebecca Fowler, a former Pinkerton agent, dismissed quietly after a scandal involving excessive force and a dead deputy. But she hadn't stopped working. Her little brother, Levi, had vanished on the trail west 2 years earlier, with his wife and newborn daughter. Their last known stop, a small chapel in the Oregon hills, run by a kind Christian family. When no one else followed the trail, she did. And now, standing in the middle of a serial killer's treasure trove, she found what she came for. A child's toy, a wooden lamb, carved initials, LF, her niece. They were here. They had been here. That's when she heard it. The sound of boots, not loud, just a slow shuffle. Ezekiel. He stood in the doorway. No lantern, no weapon, just that shovel in his hand, like always, as if it had grown from his wrist. "You shouldn't be down here," he said, voice quiet. Rebecca didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared at him in the dark. "I was hoping you'd show up," she replied. Silence. He stepped closer, eyes fixed on the lamb in her hand. She held it tighter. "You come looking for someone?" he asked. She smiled, for the first time, a tight, joyless curl of her mouth. "No," she said. "I came looking for all of you." Ezekiel moved then, fast, faster than a man his size should have, but so did she. The pistol was already in her hand, cocked, aimed, and ready. The shot rang through the earth like a bell from hell. One round to the chest, he dropped. But she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Constance was already on her feet, candle in hand, whispering prayers that sounded more like threats. They had been exposed before, briefly, once, years ago, but never like this. This wasn't a victim. This was a reckoning. Rebecca ran for the stairs, not away, but up, because she wasn't done. She wasn't leaving, not until the last Grayson was in the ground, and this time their names would be marked. Rebecca burst through the basement doors, pistol in one hand, lamb still clutched in the other. The night outside was black as ink, stars veiled behind a thick blanket of clouds, but inside her head there was only fire. She didn't run. She walked slow and cold toward the chapel. Behind her, Ezekiel's body lay bleeding into the dirt. Not dead yet, but dying fast. Ahead of her, a door creaked open. It was Constance, hair down, no veil, her face pale in the candlelight, but her eyes were stone. She stepped out into the open, arms folded calmly across her chest. No scream, no panic, just a slow blink, as if this was all part of a prophecy she'd already accepted. "I was wondering when someone would come looking," she said. Rebecca didn't speak. She raised the pistol. "You'll want Morai, too," Constance said. Inside, still praying, as if it matters now. That caught Rebecca off guard. The Graysons had killed hundreds, without remorse, without hesitation. But Constance, she wasn't pleading, she wasn't trying to run. She was surrendering. No, not quite. Constance stepped down the chapel stairs, slowly, her white nightgown brushing the boards. "You think this ends with us?" she asked. "That you've uncovered something rare?" She smiled faintly. "We are not the only ones, dear. We're just the only ones honest enough to write it all down." Rebecca moved closer, pistol aimed at Constance's heart. "You murdered children," she hissed. "We spared them," Constance whispered back. "From this world, from pain, we helped them pass in grace." "Where's my niece?" Constance tilted her head. "Which one?" And that's when Rebecca squeezed the trigger. The blast tore through the silence. Constance collapsed to the ground, candle tumbling into the weeds, flames licking the grass like a spark, hungry for breath. Rebecca stepped over the body, then pushed open the chapel door inside. Morai Grayson knelt before the altar, his back to her, a worn Bible open in front of him, his hands folded, his lips moving in silent prayer. The room smelled like oil, mold, and blood. He didn't turn round. "I suppose Ezekiel didn't stop you," he said. Rebecca said nothing. "And my wife is gone now too?" "Yes, still nothing," Morai sighed. "You came here seeking justice or vengeance. It's hard to tell the difference these days." Rebecca took one step forward. The boards creaked beneath her boot. "Don't bother trying to confess," she said. "I've seen what you've done. I've read your ledgers." Morai finally turned his head, just slightly enough to glance over his shoulder. "You read them, but you didn't understand them." "I understood enough." "No," he said, rising slowly to his feet. "You saw what we did, not why we did it." He turned fully now, his robes still neat, his collar stained red, his hands folded across his chest like a priest ready to bury. "The dead, you think you're righteous?" he asked. "I think you're done," she said. "I think we're just getting started." Rebecca didn't wait. The gun kicked hard in her palm. One shot, then another. Morai staggered backward, a flash of blood on the altar behind him. He fell to his knees, breath wheezing, mouth moving. But this time, no prayer came out. Rebecca stood there, breathing heavy, hands shaking. Then she heard it, from behind the walls, from beneath the floorboards, a cry, small, soft, a child's cry. Her blood turned to ice. She ran to the pulpit and threw open the trapdoor behind it. The hidden hatch she'd missed before. It led deeper than the basement. A spiral staircase, into stone. Candles flickered down below. And that cry, it wasn't just one child, it was several. She descended fast, boots hitting stone, heart pounding, and what she found would haunt her until her last breath. The air grew colder with every step. Damp stone walls closed in around her like the gullet of some ancient beast. Rebecca's lantern flickered, struggling to keep up with her breath, her heartbeat, her terror. The cries grew louder, not wails, not yet, but soft, frightened sounds. Children, plural. The steps ended at a dirt floor, uneven, packed hard. The chamber stretched out, low and wide, supported by thick wooden beams. It smelled of rot, sweat, and something else, something sweet and sour like spoiled milk and death. She moved forward, slow, gun raised. That's when she saw them, gauges, 4 of them, rusty, iron-barred cages lined up in a row like pens in a butcher's shop. Inside, huddled in blankets and straw, were children, 4, maybe 5, dirty, thin, pale, but alive. One little girl, no older than 6, looked up with watery eyes. Her lips trembled, and she whispered the words that almost dropped Rebecca to her knees. "Are you the angel they said would come?" Rebecca ran to the cages, fumbling at the locks. Her hands shook as the pistol clattered to the floor. She reached for her knife, jammed it into the latch, twisting, breaking the rusted seal. One by one, the cages popped open. The children didn't move right away. They were too shocked, too used to whispers in the dark and lies dressed in holy robes. One boy covered his head with both arms and whimpered, "Please don't take me for weighing again." Rebecca bit down hard to keep from screaming. She crouched low. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I'm not one of them. I'm going to get you out." The girl, the one who'd spoken, crawled out first. She had blonde hair, tangled with straw. Around her neck was a locket. Rebecca reached for it, opened it. Inside, a lock of hair. A man and woman. And one word carved in soft Cursive. Levi. Her brother. This was his daughter. The child didn't know her, but Rebecca knew her. Tears blurred her vision as she pulled the girl close. "You're coming with me," she whispered. "You all are." But, just as she stood to gather them, something shifted behind her. A creak, wood groaning, a gust of warm air from somewhere that should have been sealed shut, then the click, a gun hammer being drawn back. She turned slowly and froze. Ezekiel, bleeding, pale but alive. He stood at the bottom of the staircase, blood soaking his shirt, a jagged knife in one hand, Rebecca's pistol in the other. His face wasn't calm anymore. It was savage. "I told M," he slurred, voice thick with rage. "I told M we should have burned the basement after Missouri. Should have never kept the little ones so close." He raised the pistol, breathing hard. "You ruined everything." Rebecca didn't flinch. "You're bleeding out, Ezekiel. You won't make it 10 steps. He looked down at the children, then back at her. "I ain't got to make 10, he fired. The bullet missed. Rebecca ducked, grabbed a rusted pan from the ground, and hurled it. It struck his wrist. He screamed. The gun clattered, and he lunged at her like a bull. They crashed into the dirt. He was strong, even dying, his hands wrapped around her throat, squeezing hard, gritting his teeth as blood poured from his chest wound onto her coat. "Wanna be a savior, huh?" he hissed. "Go on then. Save someone with no breath." Her fingers fumbled blindly, found a shard of bone near the cage, sharp as a dagger. She stabbed upward with everything she had. Once, twice, again. Ezekiel jerked, gurgled, and collapsed. On top of her, his eyes still open, his last breath warm on her cheek. It took her 3 tries to shove his body off. The children screamed. One tried to crawl back into the cage. Rebecca knelt beside them, wiping blood from her lips, her hands shaking. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over." But she knew that wasn't true, because the chapel was on fire, and the stairwell behind her was filling with smoke. Smoke has a way of turning silence into terror. It crept down the stone stairwell, curling around beams like it had hands. The children coughed. Rebecca held her coat sleeve to their faces, one by one, trying to calm them, to breathe for them, but the air was thick, sour, choking. The chapel above them was burning. Constance's dropped candle, left in the grass, must have spread faster than Rebecca thought. Dry summer winds, wooden walls soaked in old oil. Fire needed only a crack. Now it was hungry. Rebecca stood, heart pounding. Her eyes scanned the walls, the low beams, the shadows. There had to be another way out, some exit they used to sneak bodies into this chamber without dragging them through the chapel. Every time, there a half-covered tunnel mouth at the far end of the room, hidden behind stacked crates filled with preserved food and powdered medicine. She pushed them aside, grunting with effort, her lungs burning with each breath. Behind it, a crawlspace, dirt-packed, just wide enough for a grown person to slide through. She turned to the children. "All of you, through here," she ordered. "Now." They didn't move. The little blonde girl, her niece, whimpered and clung to her leg. The boy who'd asked about weighing stared at the flames behind her like he'd seen them before. "Many times, they said we couldn't leave." "He," whispered Dot. Rebecca crouched and grabbed his shoulders. "They lied." She shoved her satchel through the tunnel first, then helped the girl crawl forward, followed by the others. One by one, scraping knees and elbows, coughing with each push. The smoke was thicker now, hot as breath on the back of the neck. She was last. The heat burned against her back as she crawled, dragging herself through the dirt, lungs heaving. Somewhere behind her, beams cracked and collapsed. When she burst out the other side, the night air hit her like a flood, cold, sharp, clean. The children huddled near a line of trees, trembling but alive. Above them, Sacred Mercy Chapel glowed red against the sky, like a church built in hell. The roof caved in with a roar. Embers danced in the air like fireflies. The steeple leaned, groaned, and toppled. Rebecca didn't speak. She watched it burn. Let it burn. The cries, the poison, the ledgers, the graves, the lies. Let it all turn to ash. But even in the warmth of that justice, something inside her felt colder than ever before, because she knew it wasn't over. When dawn came, she rode with the children in the wagon she'd taken from the Graysons, their last supply wagon, loaded with coins, clothing, and evidence. By evening, she reached a nearby town called Wraith Hollow. One saloon, one sheriff, a doctor, and a handful of settlers. When she told the sheriff what she'd seen, he didn't believe her. not at first. Then she showed him the locket, the ledgers, the ring with initials carved into its gold, the same ones etched into the frame of a missing person's flyer, pinned to the saloon wall. He turned pale. A week later, soldiers came. What was left of the chapel was still smoldering, the basement too unstable to explore fully. But the graves were there, dozens, maybe hundreds, most unmarked. They found scorched tools, charred bones, fragments of lives, and one final discovery that shook even the gravediggers. Beneath a warped metal hatch behind the altar, buried under inches of soot and ash, they found a second ledger. It was older than the others. Its cover bore no title, just a symbol, a cross with a snake wrapped around it. Inside were pages not written by Morai. They were written by someone else. Years earlier, from a different state. Names, dates, recipes, burial sites, and one final line at the bottom. Passed to Brother Morai, 1845, Oregon. Next. May the mercy continue. Rebecca stared at it for a long time. The chapel was gone. The were dead. But this was bigger. This was older. This was not the end. The ledger shook in Rebecca's hands. It was brittle, yellowed pages curling at the corners. The ink faded but legible, neat, precise, like Marie's journals, but older, tighter, as if whoever wrote it feared someone might read it and understand too much. She flipped back to the front. There was no name, just initials. A.G. and a year. 1836. That was 16 years before the Graysons ever showed up in Oregon. 16 years. Which meant one terrifying thing. Morai didn't start this. He inherited it. That night, in a candlelit room above the sheriff's station, Rebecca read every page. It started in Georgia, then Missouri, then Arkansas. The pattern was familiar. Wandering preachers setting up makeshift chapels on the edge of pioneer routes. Poison disguised as blessed medicine. Small families targeted first, then larger ones. Once suspicion was minimized, same tactics, same language, same God-soaked lies, and always the same goal: eliminate the weak, take the strong, harvest the possessions, purify the land. They called it the mercy doctrine. One passage read, "The Lord does not wait for the sick to die. He appoints us to quicken the work of his hand. Those who travel west with unclean blood must be returned to dust before they corrupt the new world. Our duty is simple: remove the rot, return only the worthy." Rebecca felt sick, not just because of the words, but because in the margins, scribbled in faint pencil, were notes, familiar handwriting, .morai, single quotes, edits, improvements. He had studied this, like scripture, like blueprint, and worse, he'd expanded it. A map was folded into the back, hand-drawn, labeled in strange symbols. Rebecca recognized Oregon's trails, California's wagon roads. But other markings, small crosses in remote regions, stretched all the way across the western frontier. Dozens of them, each with a date, each with initials, some crossed out, some circled, and one that chilled her to the bone. MDM 1857. Confirmed active. Rebecca had seen that abbreviation before. It was stamped on a wooden crate she'd pulled from the Grayson's tunnel, burned, half collapsed, but marked with bold letters. Mission of Divine Mercy. She had assumed it was just another name Morai made up for his chapel, but now it looked more like a network. She traced the route with her finger. Oregon, Northern California, Nevada, If the Graysons had contacts, if they'd spread this doctrine, then the deaths wouldn't stop with their graves. This was not just about one twisted family. This was a cult, a movement, and it was still operating. Sheriff Hammond, a man built like a whiskey barrel and twice as flammable, sat across from her and said, "So what? You think there's more of M?" Rebecca didn't even blink. "I know there are." He rubbed his jaw, spit into a tin, and muttered, "Jesus." "No," Rebecca said quietly. "Don't bring him into this." She packed her things the next morning. The children she rescued, now safe with a local doctor and his wife, begged her not to go. "You already burned the bad place," the little girl said, tugging Rebecca's coat. "Don't go to another one." But Rebecca knew something. Most people spent their lives trying to forget. Evil doesn't burn easy, and this fire was far from out. She saddled the Graysons' last horse, wrapped the old ledger in oilcloth, and slipped the lamb carving her nieces into her coat pocket. The mission of divine mercy was marked on the map. It was 3 weeks' ride south. And if that mission was anything like sacred mercy, it wouldn't just be open for service, it would already be taking lives. The road to California was dry and cruel. Rebecca rode alone, cutting through winding canyons, shadowed valleys, and silent woods. Her rifle rode beside her, the ledger tucked beneath her saddle. Her eyes fixed forward like a woman who'd already died once and hadn't forgiven God for it. For days, she passed remnants of broken dreams, overturned wagons, burned-out camps, crosses stuck in red dirt. The trail west was paved with hope, yes, but soaked in something far darker. At a remote watering hole near Shasta, she stopped to rest her horse. A man sat by the fire, alone, pale, his coat too clean for a traveler, his hands too soft for a settler. He smiled when he saw her, but something about it chilled her instantly. "You heading toward the pass?" he asked. Rebecca didn't answer. He nodded at her saddlebag. "You got the look of someone carrying something that doesn't belong to them." She kept her hand near her revolver. "And you got the voice of someone who talks too much for a man traveling alone." His grin faded. They sat in silence for a while. The flames between them popped and hissed like they knew what was coming. Then, softly, he said, "They're expecting you, you know." Rebecca's blood ran cold. What? The mission? They knew someone would come. His eyes flicked to hers. "They hoped it'd be someone like you." Rebecca stood. The man didn't flinch. He just leaned forward and whispered, "Don't follow the signs. That's how they lead you in. You'll think you're hunting them, but the whole time, they're watching you." She left without another word. 2 days later, she found it, nestled between 2 hills, like a wound that never healed, the mission of divine mercy. Bigger than the Graysons' chapel, stone and timber, a bell tower carved with vines, and below it fields tilled, planted, thriving, and people, families, children, workers, dozens of them. No one looked afraid. In fact, they looked happy, too happy. A girl played with a dog near the well. A man chopped wood with a whistle on his lips. A woman in white robes handed out jars of preserved fruit to a line of settlers. And then she saw him, a man stepping out of the mission's front doors. Late 50s, tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a long black cassock and white collar. His voice rang out like a hymn. "Brothers and sisters, a traveler approaches. Welcome her, for the Lord has brought her here with purpose." Every head turned toward Rebecca, and for the first time in a long time, she was the one being watched. The man smiled warmly. "I am Father Benedict." He extended his hand. "And this is our humble mercy." Rebecca stared at him, but all she could see was Morai. Not in face, no. Benedict was smoother, cleaner, gentler, somehow. But the tone, the cadence, the mask, it was all there. Another Grayson, or worse, something older. "Come," he said. "Let us give you rest." She didn't take his hand, but she followed him anyway, because this time, she wasn't here to escape. She was here to infiltrate and burn them down from the inside. The mission of divine mercy was a machine, polished, oiled, and perfectly disguised. Rebecca saw it in the way the people moved. No panic, no fear. Everyone had a job, a rhythm. Children swept the steps. Teenagers hauled water. Women in white robes stirred kettles full of herbs, while humming hymns that felt just a bit too slow, too hypnotic. Everything was too clean, too perfect. The mission had layers, like an onion rotted at its core. Father Benedict walked her through the outer halls, explaining the crops, the healing rooms, the sermon space, the nursery. He spoke of divine peace and purpose, like he was reciting from a script. Rebecca pretended to be grateful. She said her name was Ruth Miller, said she was from Kansas, said she'd lost her husband and brother to sickness, that she was tired, lost, and looking for a place to rest. It wasn't all lies. He accepted her story too easily. No questions, no suspicions. That bothered her most, because it meant he already knew. That night, she was assigned a room in the East Wing. Simple cot, lantern, wooden cross nailed over the bed. She explored carefully. Every window was barred from the outside. The hallway was patrolled by silent figures in gray coats, no weapons visible, but eyes sharp as razors. She waited till midnight, then she moved. Lantern in one hand, knife tucked in her boot, she crept through the halls like smoke, searching, listening. Downstairs, past the common room, she found a locked cellar door. No key, no handle, only a symbol carved into the center, a cross with a snake wrapped around it, the same one from the ledger. Her stomach turned. She turned to go. But someone was behind her, a girl no more than 12, barefoot, pale, holding a bowl of herbs. "You're not Ruth," the girl said softly. Rebecca's mouth went dry. "No," she said, "I'm not." The girl stepped closer. Her eyes were clear, too clear, like glass that had never seen sunlight. "They know," she whispered. "They always know." Rebecca crouched. "What's down there?" she asked, pointing to the cellar door. The girl looked at the floor. "The sick ones." "Sick how?" The girl didn't answer. She just looked back up and whispered, "Don't drink the tea." Footsteps echoed fast, heavy. The girl vanished into the darkness. Rebecca ducked behind a pillar as a tall man in a robe, bald, scarred, eyes to calm, appeared at the far end of the hall. He glanced toward the cellar, sniffed the air, then turned and walked away. Rebecca backed toward her room, heartbeat slamming like a war drum. Back inside, she locked the door and pulled out the old Grayson ledger. She flipped to the back to the last entries Marai had written before he died, and there it was. Benedict now oversees the Southern Mission. He writes of greater efficiency. He has removed the need for mercy over time. He believes speed, not scripture, ensures secrecy. I warned him. "Haste kills faith," he replied. "Haste kills well enough." Rebecca closed the book, So that was the difference. Morai had been slow, patient, ritualistic, but Father Benedict, he wasn't just murdering families for profit. He was building a system, a model, one that didn't require trust, just isolation. Kill fast, bury fast, move on. No prayers, no poison in tea, just slaughter. Rebecca knew now. She was inside the beating heart of something far worse than what the Graysons built, and it was still beating fast. Morning came with incense and smiling faces. Rebecca walked the mission grounds like a ghost, in borrowed skin, nodding at every bless you and peace be with you, like she belonged, like she hadn't read the death ledgers, like she didn't know what evil looked like in daylight. But what chilled her most wasn't the rituals or the robed followers. It was the children. They were everywhere, playing, working, singing. Some had numbers stitched into their collars, subtle, sewn with care, but there, if you knew to look. She counted at least 12, marked that way in the first hour. The youngest was maybe 4. She asked one of the caretakers, a thin woman named Sister Clara, what the numbers meant. Clara smiled, as if asked about her favorite flower. Just so. We don't forget who's been given to us and who's been chosen. Rebecca's skin went cold. Chosen for what? Clara's smile didn't change. For mercy. That afternoon, Father Benedict gathered the community in the main hall. Polished floors, high ceilings, a stone altar surrounded by white drapes. The air reeked of lavender and lies. Rebecca sat among them, her coat pulled tight, notebook hidden under her skirt. She watched every face, every twitch. Benedict stepped onto the dais like a king returning to court. Brothers, sisters, travelers of burden, he said, arms raised like wings. We gather today to speak not of punishment, but of purification. The world beyond these walls remains broken, diseased, loud, violent. We are the last untouched flame. A murmur of approval passed through the crowd. But with fire, he continued, comes duty. The fire must consume. It must cleanse. He looked directly at Rebecca and smiled. Then 2 men emerged from a side door, dragging someone between them. A boy. No older than 15, bruised, bound. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. This one, Benedict said, attempted to leave without blessing. He spoke blasphemy. He refused the sacrament. What happens to one, threatens all. The boy struggled, cried out, I didn't do anything, please. They took my mother. A sharp crack silenced him. Benedict stepped forward, reached into his robes, and pulled out something wrapped in white cloth, a small vial. The crowd hushed. Sister Clara, he said, begin the offering. Clara stepped forward, took the vial, and uncorked it. The smell of almonds hit the air, faint but unmistakable. Arsenic. Rebecca's hands trembled in her lap. Clara poured the contents into a tin cup, walked to the boy, held it to his lips. No, Rebecca whispered, standing without realizing. Heads turned. Benedict raised an eyebrow. Sister Ruth. Rebecca froze. She forced a smile. I just thought, perhaps the boy should be heard. If he's truly guilty, let him speak before mercy is given. Benedict stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he nodded. Very well. He turned to the boy. Speak. The boy sobbed. They killed my family. They told me I was lucky to be spared. But they lied. There's no God here. Gasps filled the room, and then came the silence, tight, hot, angry. Benedict looked at Clara, now sister. She stepped forward again. Rebecca's hand moved to her knife. Then the boy did something unexpected. He jerked hard and knocked the cup from Clara's hand. It shattered against the stone floor. That was his last act. One of the guards pulled a blade and sank it into his side before anyone could blink. He fell at Rebecca's feet, bleeding, staring up at her, whispering one word, "Run." Rebecca didn't. She dropped to her knees and pressed her hand against his wound. The blood poured freely. Benedict stared down at her. "This is what happens when doubt is allowed inside," he said. "This is disruption." Rebecca looked up at him, her hand now stained with the blood of a boy she didn't even know. Her cover was slipping. She could feel it, and she knew. The mission had just marked her. They buried the boy at dusk, not in a graveyard, not even with a prayer, just a shallow pit behind the mission's east wall, like trash. The congregation didn't attend, only Benedict, Clara, and the two guards stood by as the body was lowered. Rebecca watched from a distance, hidden behind stacked firewood, her heart a fist of rage. This wasn't just evil, it was organized, efficient, confident, the way Benedict had controlled the crowd, turned murder into ritual, reminded her of something she read in Mara's ledger. A leader need not be feared when the flock is convinced fear is love. The mission wasn't a cult, it was a system. She had to move fast. That night, she didn't sleep. She mapped everything, every hallway, every guard rotation, every whispered code she'd overheard. She marked the barred windows, the locked storage rooms, the strange cellar door. But something else began gnawing at her mind. The girl, the one who warned her. Where was she? She hadn't seen her since that night in the corridor. And there were other children she hadn't seen again either. Not playing, not working, vanished. That thought hit her like a nail in the spine. Where do they go when they disappear? The next morning, she asked Sister Clara casually, "How many children are at the mission?" Clara's eyes twitched, just slightly. "Oh, we don't count them like livestock, dear." Rebecca smiled. "Of course not, just curious. Seems like fewer today than yesterday." Clara didn't answer. She just walked away. That evening, after the evening bell, Rebecca broke into the pantry, not for food, but for a key. Clara always locked the supply cabinet with a brass skeleton key and kept it in a drawer beneath the herb jars. Rebecca found it in seconds. She took it straight to the one door she'd stared at since her arrival. The cellar with the serpent cross symbol. It opened. The hinges creaked. But the hallway beyond was oddly well lit, torches flickering on stone, walls casting long shadows. She stepped inside. Stairs led down, not dirt like the Grayson's chapel. This was built, stonework, reinforced, like a prison. The hallway at the bottom opened into rows of small cells, each with a wooden door, a feeding slot, and numbers, not names, just numbers. Inside the first cell, a girl sat in the corner, rocking. Rebecca crouched and whispered, "Hey, it's okay." The girl looked up. Her face was bruised, her eyes swollen. She said nothing. The next cell held a boy, unconscious, thin as bones. Then another, and another. All children, all silent. At the end of the hall was a locked room with one word burned into the door, weighing. Rebecca picked the lock with shaking fingers. The room inside was cold, metal, sterile. A long table, straps, a scale. And on the far wall, shelves of labeled vials. A voice spoke behind her. Now you understand. She turned. Father Benedict stood at the doorway, hands clasped. Tom, dead, calm. Rebecca didn't move, didn't reach for her knife. Not yet. Why? She asked. He stepped forward slowly. Because the world must be reborn, and rebirth demands sacrifice. You're killing children. I'm preparing them, he said. Preparing the next age. Not all can carry the light. The rest must burn away. You're insane. No, he said. I'm chosen. Silence stretched between them. Cold, tight. Then he added, you've read the ledger. You know this isn't new. It started long before me, before Morai, before any of us. He reached into his robe. Rebecca tensed, but he didn't pull a weapon. He pulled a book, bound in black leather, older than the others. He held it out to her. Take it, he said. Why? Because someone has to continue the doctrine after I'm gone. Rebecca blinked. What makes you think you're going anywhere? Benedict smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. From behind her movement, 2 guards. One of them struck, dropped to the floor, head spinning, stars in her eyes. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the book falling beside her, and Father Benedict whispering, welcome to your weighing. Darkness had weight. Rebecca felt it pressing against her skull like a vice. The back of her head throbbed, her hands bound tight, her mouth dry as ash. She tried to move, but her limbs wouldn't answer. Then she heard it, chanting, soft, slow, rising and falling like breath. Her eyes opened. She was in the weighing room, strapped to the metal table, arms wide, legs pinned. Above her, carved into the stone ceiling, was that same cursed symbol, the cross wrapped in a serpent. Father Benedict stood to her left, calm, hands folded. Sister Clara beside him, holding a polished steel tray with 6 small vials, clear, amber, crimson, black, white, and pale green. Each color represents a threshold, Benedict said, as if teaching a sermon. Pain, submission, clarity, cleansing, death, rebirth. Rebecca strained against the straps. You're not a prophet, she growled. You're a parasite. He smiled. Parasites feed. I transform. He picked up the clear vial, held it to the torchlight. This one brings the fear, strips away the ego, lets the soul shiver in its truth. He nodded. Clara stepped forward and injected it into Rebecca's arm. The effect was instant. The room stretched. The light bent. Sounds turned to whispers, then laughter, then silence. She saw faces, not present, past, more AI, Constance, Ezekiel, her brother, Levi, her niece, eyes wide, reaching for her, then flames. Then a voice, not Benedict's, not anyone's. It said, finish what they began. Rebecca looked him in the eye. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. You made one mistake, she said. He raised an eyebrow. You didn't kill me first. She pulled her wrist free, not cleanly, but hard enough to tear skin and snap the strap loose. The second hand followed. She grabbed the tray of vials and hurled it into Benedict's face. Glass shattered. Liquid burned, he screamed. Rebecca twisted, kicked Clara in the stomach, rolled off the table, and hit the stone floor hard. The door burst open. 2 guards. But she was ready. She slammed one in the knee with the fallen tray and stabbed the other. With a broken vial shard, right in the neck, blood sprayed. Screams echoed. Rebecca snatched a blade from the guard's belt and ran through the tunnel, up the stairs, into the heart of the mission. The alarm bell rang one long, echoing clang that turned smiling missionaries into wolves. The courtyard exploded into chaos. Fires lit in response. Gates locked. Children pulled indoors. But some didn't run. Some watched her. The numbered ones. The girl who'd warned her stood at the far end of the yard. She didn't hide. Threw off the tarp, and there they were. Weapons, tools. Stop. This wasn't just preservation. It was expansion. She climbed onto the wagon, snapped the reins, and yelled, "Get clear." The horses bolted through the gates, through the chaos. A straight shot into the woods. Gunshots cracked behind her. One clipped her shoulder. She grit her teeth. Didn't stop the children. She had to come back for them. But first, she had to make. Someone had to burn it into history before it burned the world. Rebecca didn't stop riding for 3 days. Blood from her shoulder soaked into her coat. Her hands blistered on the reins. The wagon creaked and rattled behind her. Or pain, or rest. She cared about the children still locked beneath stone. She cared about the dead they called purified. She cared about burning it all down. On the 4th day, she reached Fort Candlehook, a frontier outpost run by Union loyalists and militia. Tired men with too many rifles and too little patience at first. They laughed at her, a lone woman, bloodied, wild-eyed, dragging a wagon load of evidence and talking about death cults in churches. Then she opened the crates. They stopped laughing. Ledgers, vials, numbered child garments. And then there was the boy's blood, still soaked into her boots. Within 24 hours, Fort Candlehook had telegraphed Sacramento, Portland, and Washington. Within 48, a judge had signed a military warrant. Within a week, a full detachment of armed riders and federal marshals were riding toward the mission of divine mercy. And Rebecca rode with them. They reached the mission at sunrise. What they found was empty. No bodies, no clergy, no children, just ash. The fields were burned. The chapel collapsed. The barracks stripped clean. The weighing room Rebecca had bled in, buried beneath a controlled collapse. Across the stone bricks was a single sentence: "Mercy moves with the wind." Benedict had escaped and taken the children with him. The weeks that followed were chaos. The U.S. Army, chapels raided, healers questioned. For the first time, the name Grayson became more than a ghost story. It became a federal inquiry. But Rebecca knew the truth. Benedict wasn't done. He had disciples. He had maps. He had a doctrine built to survive. One night, in the mess hall of the fort, she sat across from U.S. Marshal Ellsworth, a man with a burn across half his neck and no patience for religion. "You want us to chase phantoms across 3 states," he said. "They're not phantoms," she replied. "They're preachers, and they're smarter than you think." He studied her. "And what do you want from me?" "I want one thing." She slid the ledger across the table. "I want to find every outpost they marked, every mission, every fake chapel. I want to burn them, dig up their graves, and bring the children home." Ellsworth sat back, and then she looked him in the eyes. "Then I'm going after Benedict." He lit a cigarette, took one drag, then nodded. "You'll need men." "No," she said, "I need fire." From that moment forward, Rebecca Fowler stopped being a survivor. She became a hunter, and across the Western Territories, wherever wind carried rumors of sermons in the hills or healers with too much silence around them, she followed Dot with a gun, with a flame, with the truth in her saddlebag. By spring of 1858, her name had become a whisper. Rebecca Fowler, the woman who burned Mercy to the ground. Some called her a devil, others a savior. Most didn't know what to believe, only that wherever she rode, chapels vanished, preachers fled, and strange fires lit up the night. She kept moving, town to town, one lead at a time. In Wyoming, she unearthed a pit of bones behind a healing sanctuary run by a man named Deacon Hale, a former associate of Benedict's. Hale had sewn children's names into the hem of his robe, believing it made their souls easier to reclaim. She left him hanging from his own steeple in Nevada. She found a cave shrine altar made from skulls, oils laced with belladonna, hymn books stained with blood. The congregation had fled just days earlier, but she found a note. Benedict is heading south. El Cielo calls. South, toward the border, toward Mexico. She rode harder than she ever had, down through Apache country, through canyons that whispered curses, through borderlands where law didn't live anymore, just dust, vultures, and the desperate. She passed abandoned missions, burned wagons, and travelers who'd seen a holy man with pale eyes moving fast with a caravan of children and robed men. He was close. One night, just beyond Santa Cruz, she found them, a trail camp, dozens of tents, fires, voices singing low hymns in the dark. She watched from a ridge, eyes narrowed, spying through her scope, counting heads, recognizing symbols, and then she saw him, Benedict, still dressed in black, still clean, still calm, sitting at the center of it all, reading from the Book of Mercy. Like nothing had changed, she rode back to a nearby village, rallied 3 men, vigilantes, who'd lost family to a traveling chapel months earlier, gave them guns, fire, and a plan. "We go in at dawn," she said. "Quiet, fast, we kill the guards, free the children, and him," one of them asked. Rebecca didn't hesitate. "I burn him." The morning sun never rose that day, not for the mission of El Cielo. They struck at first light. The guards didn't expect gunfire. They expected prayer. Rebecca led the charge, shot one in the throat, knifed another through the ribs. The others scattered. She kicked open the wagons where children were kept, chained, silent, pale from sedatives. "We're getting out," she told them. "Every single one of you." They didn't speak, but they followed her. Then she saw the tent. Benedict, single quotes, as she stormed inside. It was empty, except for a letter, sealed in wax, and a book, the original Book of Mercy. She opened the letter with shaking hands. "You've done well, Rebecca, truly. You are our finest proof that pain breeds devotion, that trauma makes prophets. You became exactly what we needed you to be, a fire to burn the weak so the strong can walk through ash." At the bottom, written in tight, perfect script, "El Salvador, July. We'll be waiting." She crushed the paper in her fist. He wasn't just moving, he was inviting her. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was a final chapter, one only she could write. The desert was dead quiet. Not even the wind dared stir the dust as Rebecca crossed into El Salvador in the summer of 1858. Her coat was torn, her boots blood-soaked, her eyes sunken but sharp. She had nothing left to lose, only one thing left to kill. She followed every whisper, every scarred villager's warning, every trail of strange sermons and children that vanished in the night, until finally she found it, a monastery built into the side of a cliff, carved from black stone, like it had been grown from the mountain itself. No crosses, no bells, only a serpent etched into the stone above the entrance, mouth open in a silent scream. This wasn't a mission, it was a nest. She approached alone, no army, no allies, just the Book of Mercy in one hand and a bundle of dynamite in the other. At the entrance, two men stepped forward, faces hidden by bone masks. They didn't speak, Rebecca did. "Take me to Benedict." They hesitated, then moved aside. She walked through halls soaked in candlelight, past followers draped in blood-colored robes, chanting in languages that had no name. They didn't stop her. They welcomed her, like she was a queen, come to claim her throne. At the center of it all, a circular chamber with a pit in the middle. Flames burned low inside. Dozens of children sat silently around it, heads bowed. And across from them, Benedict, older but unchanged. He looked up and smiled like they were old friends. "I knew you'd come," he said. Rebecca didn't speak. "You've done what no man ever could. You destroyed sacred mercy. You scattered the network. You made them fear you." Still, she said nothing. Benedict stepped closer, voice lowering to a whisper. "You were never meant to stop us. You were meant to replace us." He opened the Book of Mercy, the original, the root text. "Read it," he said. "Claim it. Be the new flame." Rebecca looked down at the book, then up at the children, then back at him, and smiled. "You want me to be the fire?" "Yes," he said, eyes glinting. She pulled the fuse. "I already lit it." The bundle of dynamite she'd buried beneath the entrance detonated. The walls shook. Screams erupted. The chamber filled with dust and flame. Rebecca drew her revolver and fired twice. One bullet struck Benedict in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He stumbled, clutching his side. "No," he roared. "You don't get to end this." She walked toward him, slow and steady, gun smoking in her hand. "You're right," she said. "I don't get to end it." She grabbed the Book of Mercy from his hands. "I get to erase it." She tossed it into the pit of fire. The flames swallowed it whole. Benedict screamed, not in pain, but in horror, like something divine had been severed from his soul. The ceiling began to crack. The children, silent no more, began to cry. Scream, run. Rebecca turned and shouted, "Go." They fled into the halls. She followed last behind her. The chamber collapsed. Rock and fire buried the last sermon ever spoken in that place. Outside, smoke poured from the cliffside as children stumbled into the light, blinking, coughing, alive. Rebecca stood alone, bloodied and burned, watching the mountain crumble behind her. It was over. No more mercy, no more doctrine, no more Graysons. That night, she wrote her brother's name in the dirt, then her niece's, then every name from every ledger she ever read. And when the last name was written, she laid down beside it and slept for the first time in years.